There's this scene in The Amazing World of Gumball, Season 3, Episode 28, The Question, where Gumball and Darwin are sitting on a park bench next to Sussy. They've spent the entire episode asking everyone in Elmore what the meaning of life is. They asked Larry, they asked Alan, they asked Nicole, they even asked the literal planets of the solar system, and nobody gave them an answer that stuck. And then Sussy, of all people, just says it. She says the meaning of life is finding your own way to enjoy it. And then she throws mayonnaise at a pigeon. I think about that moment more than I'd like to admit. Not the pigeon part, although that is genuinely one of the funniest visual gags the show ever pulled off. But the fact that the wisest thing this show ever said came from the character everyone else writes off as the weird one. The character who talks with a chin puppet. The character who exists, in the eyes of Elmore, as basically a joke. And that's kind of the whole show, right? The Amazing World of Gumball looks like chaos. It looks like a kid's show where a blue cat and his pet goldfish brother do dumb stuff for 11 minutes. And yeah, it is that. But it's also one of the most quietly profound shows I've ever watched. And I've watched it a lot. I've watched it late at night when I couldn't sleep. I've watched it when I was going through stuff and didn't want to think about anything heavy. And somehow, this show where 2D characters walk through photographs of real suburbs, kept sneaking in these moments that would genuinely change how I thought about things. So tonight, that's what we're doing. We're going through the life-changing lessons buried inside the amazing world of Gumball. Not the surface level, be nice to your friends stuff. The real ones. The ones about identity, about family, about what it means to exist in a world that might not care whether you do. The ones that hit you at 2 a.m. and make you pause the video and just sit there for a second. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable because we're going to be here for a while. Grab a blanket, turn the lights down, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. But no pressure. Tonight, it's just us and Elmore. Let's start where I think the show starts getting serious about all of this. There's a specific type of children's show that knows it's a children's show and doesn't care. It'll tell the truth anyway. Gumball figured that out around Season 2 with The Hero, which first aired on June 19th, 2013, and it never really stopped. In that episode, Gumball and Darwin say something cruel about Richard behind his back. They call him a lousy father. They list all the ways he's embarrassing and useless and lazy. And the thing is, and this is the part that gets me, Richard hears them. He hears every word. And this giant, childlike, harmless man who has never done anything with any kind of malice in his entire life just breaks. Look, I know Richard Watterson is a cartoon character. I know he's drawn as a big pink rabbit who once ate the furniture because he forgot it wasn't food. But the way the show handles his reaction to hearing his sons talk about him like that, it's not played for laughs. Not fully. There's comedy in the episode, sure, because this is still Gumball. But there are these moments where Richard is trying so hard to prove he's a good dad, trying to show his kids that he matters, and the show just lets the weight of that sit there. It doesn't rush past it. It doesn't undercut it with a joke every 5 seconds. It lets you feel it. And here's the lesson, and I think it's one of the first truly life-changing ones the show offers. The people closest to you hear the things you say when you think they can't, and those words don't bounce off. They don't disappear. They land. They stick. They change things. Gumball and Darwin didn't mean to hurt their dad. They were being kids. They were venting. But the show is smart enough to know that intent doesn't erase impact. Richard didn't care why they said it. He cared that they said it. And that distinction between what you meant and what landed, I think about that constantly. I actually rewatched that episode putting this video together, and I noticed something I'd missed before. There's a moment where Richard is sitting alone in the kitchen, and the show holds on him for maybe 2 full seconds before anyone says anything. And in those 2 seconds, his expression shifts from confused to genuinely sad. Not cartoon sad, not exaggerated crying with a waterfall of tears, just sad, like a person. In a show where the art style is deliberately absurd, where a 2D rabbit exists next to a 3D cactus and a live-action photograph of a suburban house, the show chose to make Richard's sadness look real. That's a choice. That's intentional, and it matters. I think that's lesson 1 from this show, and it comes early. Your words have weight, even when you don't mean them to, especially when you don't mean them to, because the people who love you the most are the ones listening the hardest. Now, if The Hero is Gumball learning that words hurt, then The Words, Season 2, Episode 12, is the flip side of that coin. And honestly, I think this one's even more interesting. Darwin is too polite to say what he really thinks. He chokes on his frustration instead of speaking up. So Gumball teaches him to be direct, and once Darwin learns, he can't stop. He starts saying exactly what he thinks to everyone. No filter, no politeness, just raw, uncut honesty. And it destroys every single interaction he has. Here's the thing most shows would do with this premise. They'd make it a simple, honesty is the best policy, but be nice about it episode. Done in 11 minutes. Lesson learned, credits roll. Gumball doesn't do that. Gumball actually sits with the tension. It asks, okay, but what if being honest really does mean saying things people don't want to hear? What if the truth is mean? What if the kind thing and the honest thing are genuinely in conflict, and you can't have both? And it doesn't resolve that tension neatly. It doesn't give you a clean answer, because there isn't one. And a show for 12-year-olds had the guts to say, yeah, this is complicated, and you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. The lesson isn't be honest or be kind. The lesson is that navigating the space between those two things is one of the hardest parts of being a person, and you're going to mess it up constantly. And that's okay, as long as you're trying. I need you to think about what this show just did. It took a premise that could have been a 5-minute moral and turned it into an actual philosophical problem on Cartoon Network, between ads for cereal and toy commercials. That's what this show does. It sneaks things in. And speaking of sneaking things in, let me talk about Nicole Watterson, because I don't think any character on this show teaches more life-changing lessons than Nicole, and I don't think she gets nearly enough credit for it. Season 5, Episode 6, The Choices. This aired on October 13th, 2016, and I genuinely believe it might be the best 11 minutes of television Cartoon Network has ever produced. I know that sounds like hyperbole. I don't care. I mean it. The setup is beautifully simple. It's dinner time, the family is being chaotic, and Nicole freezes. The show literally freezes the frame around her while she thinks, and she starts remembering. She remembers meeting Richard when they were 12. She remembers her parents, Daniel and Mary Senecourt, and how they pushed her relentlessly, how nothing she did was ever good enough, how every accomplishment was just the starting line for the next demand. And then, the episode does something extraordinary. It shows us what would have happened if Nicole had made different choices. Not just one different choice, multiple. What if she'd won the martial arts tournament? What if she'd married someone else? What if she'd listened to her parents? And each alternate path escalates, from success to power to totalitarianism to apocalypse. The show plays it for laughs. Nicole as a futuristic dictator in front of what looks like the Ryugyong Hotel from Pyongyang. But underneath the comedy, there's this aching truth. Every possible path that prioritizes ambition over love, that prioritizes achievement over connection, ends in disaster. And then we get the path she actually took. And this is where I lose it every single time. The show does this montage. No dialogue, just music, of Nicole and Richard's life together. Meeting as kids, eating ramen in a tiny apartment next to a train station, finding out she's pregnant. Getting married in a park with 2 empty seats where her parents should have been. Richard holding newborn Gumball. Gumball's first steps. Darwin joining the family. Aeneas being born. A family photo. And Nicole looks at all of it. Everything she's been through. Every struggle. Every moment where Richard did something catastrophically stupid. Every night where she was exhausted and overwhelmed and holding everything together by sheer force of will. And she laughs. She laughs and starts a food fight with her family. Okay, so the lesson, and I think it's genuinely life-changing. Here it is. The life you actually have, the messy, imperfect, exhausting, chaotic one, might be the best one. Not because it's easy, not because it's what you planned, but because it's real. It's yours. It's full of people who drive you insane, but who you would choose again in a heartbeat. I think about this every time I catch myself fantasizing about some other version of my life. Some version where I made different choices, took different paths, and the choices just sits there quietly and says, yeah, but would you trade this? Would you actually trade the people you have for a version of yourself that's more successful but more alone? And the answer, every single time, is no, at least for me. And I think Nicole would say the same. The episode also sneaks in something about parents that I think people miss. Nicole's parents weren't villains. They weren't evil. They were demanding, high-achieving people who expressed their love through pressure, through expectations, through a refusal to let her settle for anything less than extraordinary. And the show doesn't say they were wrong to want those things. It says the way they communicated those wants damaged their relationship with their daughter so badly that she didn't speak to them for 20 years. The Parents, Season 6, Episode 16, picks this thread up later. It aired on May 25th, 2018, and it's the episode where Nicole finally confronts her mother and father after all those years of estrangement. And the show does something incredibly honest. It shows both sides. Nicole's parents did try to come to her wedding. They just misread RSVP as the name of a town and ended up in Moldova. It's absurd. It's hilarious. And it's also heartbreaking because it means 20 years of silence could have been avoided by a simple miscommunication. The lesson here isn't just about forgiveness. It's about how easily love gets lost in translation. How two people can both be trying their best and still end up hurting each other. How a parent's version of love and a child's need for acceptance can be pointed at the same target and still miss each other completely. I think that's one of the most important things this show ever says, and it says it through a family of cartoon cats. The animation style doesn't diminish the truth. If anything, it makes you more receptive to it because your guard is down. You weren't expecting a show about a blue cat to make you rethink your relationship with your parents. That's the genius of Gumball. It uses the silliness as a delivery mechanism for things that would feel heavy in any other context. Ben Bacalé, the show's creator, once described the show as a big sandbox where you can use all sorts of different toys. And one of the toys in that sandbox, apparently, is emotional devastation. I want to stay with family for a little while longer, because there's another thread here that I think gets overlooked, and it has to do with Darwin. The Origins, Season 4, Episodes 20 and 21, is the show's first half-hour episode, and it tells the story of how Darwin became part of the Watterson family. It aired on February 15th, 2016. And on the surface, it's a cute origin story. Nicole and Richard buy a pet goldfish for their hyperactive toddler Gumball, and after several fish die, Richard keeps accidentally killing them, which is played as a dark running gag. This one fish, the one we'll come to know as Darwin, turns out to be different. But the second part is where it gets me. Darwin gets accidentally flushed down the toilet. He ends up in the ocean, and he decides to walk back. A fish decides to walk back to his family. He grows lungs. He grows legs. He walks across Elmore, gets captured by animal control, escapes, and finally finds the Wattersons, just as they're about to buy a replacement. And he sees them. He sees them about to replace him, and he leaves. He turns around and walks away, heartbroken. I mean, okay, I know we're talking about a cartoon goldfish here, but that moment, the moment where Darwin sees that the family he literally evolved for is ready to move on without him, that is one of the most devastating images this show ever produced, because it speaks to something universal. The fear that you matter less to the people you love than they matter to you. The fear that you're replaceable. The fear that all your effort, all your transformation, all the lungs and legs you grew just to get back to them wasn't enough. But then Gumball stops it. He tells his parents he doesn't want another fish. He wants Darwin. And the episode ends with the two of them falling asleep together in the back of the family car. And it's quiet, and it's gentle. And I've watched this show probably hundreds of hours at this point, and that ending still gets to me. The lesson, and I think it's one of the most important ones the show ever tells, is that love isn't about being perfect. It isn't about being convenient. Darwin was the world's worst pet fish. He couldn't swim properly. He kept trying to talk. He was weird and different, and nothing like what Nicole and Richard expected when they walked into that pet store. But Gumball loved him anyway, not despite his weirdness, because of it. Because Darwin was Darwin, and that was enough. And I think there's a companion lesson hiding inside that story, one that's maybe even more important. The people who are worth loving are the ones who don't replace you when things get hard. The ones who stop in the pet store aisle and say, no, I want the weird one. I want the one who grew legs and walked across town. I want the one who was willing to change everything about himself just to come home. I've been talking about family because that's where the show's emotional core lives, but Gumball has just as much to say about identity. And I think the clearest example of that is The Shell. Season 3, Episode 20, The Shell, aired on October 9th, 2014. And it's the episode where Penny Fitzgerald finally comes out of her shell. Literally. She breaks open her peanut shell and reveals her true form, a shape-shifting fairy whose appearance changes based on her emotions. Ben Bacalé described the episode as an homage to Studio Ghibli films, particularly Hayao Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle and Princess Mononoke, and you can see it. You can absolutely see it. When Penny transforms into a dragon, she looks like Haku from Spirited Away. When she becomes a wolf, it's pure Mononoke. The whole episode has this sweeping, romantic, almost epic quality that you don't expect from an 11-minute Cartoon Network show. But the lesson, here's the thing. The lesson isn't be yourself. Every show tells you to be yourself. That's the most generic advice in the history of children's television. What Gumball does differently is it shows you what being yourself actually costs. Penny breaks out of her shell and immediately panics. She starts shape-shifting uncontrollably. When she feels ugly, she turns into a monster. When she feels scared, she becomes something terrifying. Her own self-image is so fragile that her physical form can't hold steady. She literally becomes the monster she's afraid everyone thinks she is. And her dad, Patrick Fitzgerald, is furious. Not because he's a bad father, but because the shell was protection. The shell was safe. The shell was tradition. And in taking it off, Penny has made herself vulnerable in ways that terrify him. I think about how many real conversations that maps onto. How many people stay in their shells, metaphorical ones, because the people around them are scared of what happens if they take them off. Not out of cruelty, out of love, out of a genuine belief that the world is harsh and the shell keeps them safe. And the show sits with that tension. It doesn't make Patrick the villain. It makes him a scared dad who loves his daughter and doesn't know how to love the version of her he can't protect. And then Gumball does the thing that earns this show every ounce of respect I have for it. Penny, in her wolf form, fur and teeth, and nothing like the neat little peanut girl everyone knew, asks Gumball if he could really love her. And Gumball says, "Your looks don't define who you are. They just show how you feel." And he kisses her, and she transforms back into her true form, glowing, beautiful, free. The lesson isn't be yourself. The lesson is the right people will love the version of you that exists without the shell. And finding those people is worth the terror of taking it off. The Transformation, Season 6, Episode 22, picks this up 4 years later, when Penny's entire family has to decide whether to follow her lead and abandon their shells. And the show gets even more interesting here, because it turns the identity question into a family question. Is transformation a personal choice, or does it ripple outward? Can you change yourself without changing the people around you? Can you be free without forcing the people who love you to confront their own fear? There's a moment in that episode where Gumball tries to mediate between Penny and her father, and he tells this nested story, a story within a story, within a story, about a king who locked everyone in a castle, and a princess who wanted out. And Patrick, listening to this recursive parable, suddenly realizes that he's been telling the same story to Penny over and over. Stay safe, stay small, stay inside the shell. And the repetition, the nesting, is the point. The pattern only breaks when someone tells a different story. I think that might be the most sophisticated thing the show ever did narratively. Using a structural trick, nested storytelling, to illustrate the psychological reality of inherited patterns. The way families pass down their fears like furniture. The way the same arguments recur generation after generation, each time with slightly different words, but the same meaning. And the only way to break it is to tell a different story, to choose a different ending. Honestly, that episode was guest animated by Julian Glander in this deliberately low-poly CGI style for Gumball's story segments, and it looks completely different from the rest of the show. It's weird and angular and a little ugly. And I think that's the point too. The different story looks different. It has to. If it looked the same, it would be the same story. Okay, let me shift gears a little, because I've been talking about the emotional episodes, and those are important. But there's another category of life-changing lesson in Gumball that comes from a completely different place. The show's existential streak. And I know that sounds insane. The existential streak of the amazing world of Gumball. But stick with me. The Void, Season 3, Episode 12, introduces one of the most unsettling concepts in all of children's animation. Gumball, Darwin, and Mr. Small discover that their classmate Molly has disappeared. Not moved away, not died, disappeared. And when they go looking for her, they find a literal tear in the fabric of reality that leads to a dimension called the Void, a place where the world stores its mistakes. Everything that didn't work out. Everything that was deemed unnecessary or boring or failed. The Void contains discarded trends like laser discs and mullets, abandoned concepts, and, here's the terrifying part, people. People who the world decided weren't interesting enough to keep. Molly is in there because she's boring. Let me say that again. The universe the actual fabric of existence in Gumball's world, decided that this girl wasn't entertaining enough to exist, and quietly erased her, and nobody noticed. Nobody remembered. Because the void doesn't just take you, it takes every memory of you along with it. If this show wasn't a comedy, this would be Kafka. This would be Borges. This would be existential horror of the highest order. A universe that evaluates its inhabitants on their entertainment value and silently deletes the ones that don't measure up. A dimension that enforces the logic of audience attention. You're only real if you're interesting? That's not a kid's show premise. That's a graduate-level philosophy seminar. And the scariest thing about the void isn't what it does. It's that it works. Nobody notices the disappearances. Nobody questions the gaps. The world just folds in on itself, and the empty space where someone used to be smooths over like it was never there. I sat with that for a long time after I first watched it, because the void is obviously a metaphor. On one level, it's about what happens to canceled shows and dropped characters and abandoned storylines. It's a meta joke about the nature of fiction. But on another level, it's about something much more real. The fear of being forgotten. The fear of being so unremarkable that the world itself stops noticing you. The fear that mattering requires performance, requires entertainment, requires constant proof that you deserve to exist. And then there's Rob. If the void is the question, Rob is the answer the show gives. And it's not a comforting one. Rob was a background character, a blue Cyclops kid who showed up in maybe 3 episodes of the first 2 seasons. He was so forgettable that when Gumball and Darwin literally walked past him in the void during the rescue mission, they didn't even see him. He was right there, reaching out, and they just kept walking. In The Nobody, Season 3, Episode 36, which aired on March 5th, 2015, Rob escapes from the void, but he comes back wrong. His body is glitched, half-rendered, covered in static. Parts of him look like unfinished 3D models, and he has no memory of who he was. He's living in the Wattersons' basement, stealing their things because he has nothing of his own, because the world took everything from him and didn't even bother to do it cruelly. It just forgot. When Gumball and Darwin find him and try to help him figure out who he is, they suggest different identities he could take on. He could be the cool slacker. Nope. Rocky's already that. The town clown, taken by Banana Joe. Every role is filled. Every personality is claimed. There's nothing left for him. And then Gumball suggests, well, you could be the bad guy. Nobody's doing that, and Rob remembers everything. The void, being forgotten, being left behind. And he doesn't just accept the villain role, he embraces it, because at least being the villain means he exists. At least being hated means he matters. At least being the bad guy is a role nobody else wanted, which means it's his, entirely his. I've never seen another children's show do this. Take a background character and turn their obscurity into an existential crisis so vivid that the audience can feel it. Rob's pain isn't dramatic, it's bureaucratic. It's the pain of filling out a form and realizing there's no box for you. It's the pain of walking into a room where every seat is taken, and every conversation is full, and nobody looks up when you enter. It's the pain of being so thoroughly overlooked that when you finally demand to be seen, the only way anyone will look at you is if you become their problem. And here's the lesson, and it's a hard one. The world doesn't owe you a role. It doesn't automatically make space for you. And the rage you feel when you realize that, when you realize that nobody's keeping a seat warm for you, that you have to carve out your own place, that rage is real, and it's valid, and it can either destroy you or define you. Rob chose to let it define him as a villain, but the show is careful to suggest that wasn't the only choice. It was just the loudest one. The Disaster and The Rerun, the Season 4 finale and Season 5 premiere, forming the show's first true 2-parter, take Rob's existential crisis and crank it up to 11. Rob gets his hands on a universal remote control, one that can rewind time, pause reality, and change channels on existence itself. And he uses it not to take over the world, but to destroy Gumball. Because in Rob's mind, Gumball is the main character, the one the world revolves around, the one whose existence justifies and necessitates everything else. And if the world only has room for one story, and that story is Gumball's, then what is Rob? A supporting character in someone else's narrative? A plot device? A nobody? That right there, that is the question this show keeps asking. Dressed up in slapstick and mixed media animation and jokes about homework, what does it mean to matter? Who decides? And if the answer is the audience, If the answer is, you only exist because someone is watching, then what happens when they look away? I think Gumball asks these questions better than most adult shows that try to tackle the same territory, because it doesn't try to be profound. It doesn't announce its themes with a trumpet. It just asks them quietly, while a 2D cat is running through a photographed suburban landscape, being chased by a glitched out Cyclops with a TV remote. And somehow, it works. Let me talk about a different kind of lesson now. Something less existential and more practical. Because for all its philosophical depth, Gumball is also really smart about everyday human stuff. The stuff that actually comes up in your life on a Tuesday afternoon. The Safety, Season 3, Episode 32, is about overprotection. Darwin watches a disturbing safety video in health class and becomes convinced that the world is too dangerous for anyone to navigate without his supervision. He starts controlling everyone's behavior. He puts filters on the house. He builds a surveillance network. He becomes, essentially, a benevolent dictator, all in the name of keeping people safe. And the show doesn't just play this for laughs. It plays it for commentary. Darwin's safety regime has Nazi-adjacent imagery. The banners he designs bear a resemblance to the Party Adler eagle. The way citizens start parroting "it's for our own good" echoes the brainwashed villagers in Hot Fuzz. The show is drawing a direct line between caring too much and controlling too much, between protection and oppression, between the impulse to keep people safe and the reality that safety, taken to its logical extreme, is a prison. Gumball eventually confronts Darwin and tells him something that I think is actually genuinely important. Life isn't safe. It was never going to be safe. And the attempt to make it perfectly safe is more dangerous than the risks themselves. I think about that every time I see a well-meaning system, digital, social, institutional, that starts with protection and ends with control. Every time someone builds a wall around something fragile and doesn't notice that the wall became a cage. Gumball said that. A show about a blue cat said that, and it was right. The Downer, Season 3, Episode 37, tackles depression. And I don't use that word lightly, because the show doesn't use it at all. It never says the word depression. It doesn't need to. The episode shows it. Gumball wakes up in a terrible mood for no reason. His family tries to cheer him up. They fail. He yells at them to go away, and then everyone disappears. The whole town empties out. The billboards turn gray and hostile. A mass of literal darkness starts consuming everything. Streets, buildings, the sky itself, and chasing Gumball through an increasingly distorted, nightmarish version of Elmore. Ben Bacalé has said that this episode went through a considerable rewrite because the early draft was deemed excessively dark. And I believe that, because even the aired version pushes boundaries for children's animation. The way Gumball tries to cheer himself up, singing a song, making dinner, pretending his family is there, and fails every time. The way the darkness isn't metaphorical, but literal, a physical presence that wants to swallow him. The way his internal monologue splits into two voices, arguing with each other about whether anyone cares. And then, at the very end, Darwin appears. The darkness recedes, and we learn, in a reveal that is both funny and devastating, that none of it was real. Gumball was hallucinating the entire time. He was walking through a populated Elmore, ignoring everyone, lost inside his own head. His family saw everything. They just decided to save him the embarrassment. The lesson here isn't cheer up. Thank God it isn't cheer up. The lesson is, depression lies to you. It tells you that everyone's gone, that you're alone, that the darkness is real and permanent. But none of that is true. The people who love you are still there. You just can't see them right now. And they know that. And they're waiting. I actually have a theory about this that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think The Downer is the episode that most clearly shows Gumball's mixed media animation style being used as a storytelling tool rather than just an aesthetic choice. As Gumball's depression deepens, the animation degrades. The backgrounds become more distorted. The live-action photographs that make up Elmore's environment start looking more hostile, more alien. The darkness that chases him isn't hand-drawn or CGI. It's a kind of visual corruption, like the show itself is breaking down. And when Darwin appears and things start returning to normal, the animation quality literally improves. The backgrounds warm up. The lighting softens. The show uses its own visual language, the thing that makes it look like nothing else on television, to illustrate the subjective experience of a mental health episode. I think that's extraordinary. I think it's one of the most innovative things any animated show has done with its own medium. And I think it teaches something important. The way you see the world changes when you're struggling. The world doesn't actually get darker. Your perception of it does. And knowing that, really understanding that, is the first step towards seeing clearly again. Let me sit with the show's relationship to honesty for a moment, because it comes up again and again across multiple episodes. And each time, the show's position evolves. The Sock, Season 1, Episode 23, is an early take on honesty, where Mr. Small teaches Gumball and Darwin about being truthful through increasingly absurd methods that all backfire spectacularly. It's a simple premise with a simple lesson. Honesty is complicated. But as the show matures, it gets much more specific about why. In The Saint, Season 3, Episode 29, which aired on January 23rd, 2015, Gumball becomes obsessed with proving that Alan, the perpetually cheerful balloon, must have a dark side. He tests Alan's patience, his kindness, his forgiveness, his everything. He does genuinely terrible things, destroys Alan's possessions, sabotages his relationships, even gets him deflated. And Alan just forgives him every time, without resentment, without anger, with genuine, unmovable grace. And here's the thing that kills me about this episode. Gumball doesn't learn the lesson you think he's going to learn. He doesn't walk away thinking, I should be more like Alan. He walks away angry because Alan's unlimited forgiveness isn't inspiring to him. It's threatening. If someone can be that good, then what does that say about you? If goodness is possible at that scale, then your own mediocrity isn't just laziness. It's a choice. And Gumball can't handle that. He'd rather prove that everyone is secretly selfish than accept that some people genuinely aren't. I think that's one of the most psychologically honest things I've ever seen in a children's show. The idea that encountering genuine goodness can make you feel worse about yourself, that the existence of kind people isn't always comforting, sometimes it's an indictment, and that the impulse to tear down the good isn't always about malice. Sometimes it's about self-protection. If nobody's really good, then you don't have to feel bad about not being good enough. The lesson isn't be like Alan. The lesson is, when you meet someone who makes you uncomfortable with how good they are, pay attention to that discomfort. It's telling you something about yourself, and it might be the most important thing you learn today. Gumball's treatment of money and class is something I don't think gets enough attention. So let me spend a minute on the money. Season 3, Episode 40, the Season 3 finale. The Wattersons run out of money, completely. And the episode tracks what happens. First their food goes, then their furniture, then their house. Then, and this is where it gets meta, their animation. Literally. As the budget disappears, the characters lose their colors. The backgrounds degrade from fully rendered environments to storyboards to sticky notes. The sound quality drops. The show eats itself. And Gumball is the one refusing to sell out. He's principled. He's proud. He won't do the joyful burger commercial. And the episode lets him be right about that, for a while. But then, it shows him the consequences of that pride. His family is sitting in a gutted house with no electricity, no food, no furniture, and Gumball is singing a song about the power of imagination, while everyone stares at him with the kind of exhausted hostility that I recognize from real life. Because here's the lesson: principles are a luxury. And I don't say that cynically. I say it the way the episode says it, with the understanding that sometimes the noble thing and the practical thing are at war. And the practical thing has to win because your family needs to eat. Gumball's pride in not selling out is admirable in the abstract and useless in the specific. His family doesn't need his integrity. They need their lights turned back on. And the show doesn't punish him for his idealism. Exactly. But it doesn't reward him either. It just shows him, clearly and honestly, what his idealism costs when other people are paying the price. And that's a lesson a lot of adults still haven't learned. I want to talk about the name. Season 3, Episode 7, because I think it contains one of the show's most underrated lessons about identity. Gumball discovers that his real name isn't Gumball. It's Zach Watterson. And the moment he starts using that name, he changes. Zach isn't like Gumball. Zach is confident, aggressive, selfish, and cool in all the ways Gumball isn't. Zach wears his cap backwards. Zach doesn't care about Darwin or his family. Zach is, in every way that matters, a different person, and the episode treats this as a genuine threat. Zach isn't just an attitude, he's an identity trying to overwrite Gumball's. As Zach takes over, Gumball's memories start changing. His history gets rewritten. The person he was is being erased and replaced by the person he's pretending to be. That is one of the most sophisticated things I've ever seen a cartoon do with the concept of identity. The idea that a name can change you, that the story you tell about yourself can overwrite the truth, that if you pretend to be someone else for long enough, you don't just fool other people, you fool yourself. And the version of you that gets overwritten doesn't go quietly. It fights back, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it's gone. The way the show resolves this, with Gumball's family and friends helping him remember who he really is, literally pulling him back from the edge of identity erasure, is sweet and satisfying. But the lesson that lingers isn't the resolution. It's the warning. Be careful who you pretend to be. Because one day, you might forget you were pretending. And honestly, I think that lesson applies to more than just names and personas. I think it applies to every decision we make about who we present to the world. Social media, career choices, the version of yourself you perform for different audiences. Gumball says, the performance can become the reality. And if the reality you're performing isn't one you actually want to live in, you better stop before the old you doesn't have enough memories left to come back. Let me take a turn towards something lighter, because for all the heavy stuff, Gumball is also a show that teaches you how to laugh at yourself, and I think that's a genuinely life-changing skill. The Misunderstandings, Season 4, is basically a masterclass in how small communication errors cascade into catastrophe. Gumball spends the entire episode being misunderstood, not because he's saying anything wrong, but because context shifts every single meaning. The same words, said to different people in different situations, produce wildly different interpretations. And Gumball can't fix it. Every attempt to clarify makes it worse. Every explanation adds a new layer of misunderstanding. And this is one of those episodes I think about at random moments and just start smiling, because it's perfectly observed. We've all been there. We've all said something completely innocent and watched it transform into something offensive in the space between our mouth and someone else's ears. And the show's lesson isn't be more careful with your words, although that's part of it. The lesson is, misunderstanding is inevitable. Communication is imperfect. The gap between what you mean and what people hear is permanent and unbridgeable. And the only response that works is humility and humor. Which brings me to The Awkwardness, another episode I love, about Gumball and Hot Dog Guy crossing paths and experiencing crippling social awkwardness. The show dedicates an entire 11 minutes to the excruciating discomfort of running into someone you barely know and not knowing how to navigate the interaction. The pauses, the false starts, the desperate search for something to say, the mutual knowledge that this is painful for both of you, but neither of you can escape it. And the lesson is so simple, but so true. Everyone feels this. Everyone. The person you think is confident and socially graceful is dying inside too. They're just better at hiding it. Awkwardness isn't a flaw. It's a shared human condition. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner it stops being terrifying and starts being kind of funny. Actually funny. Not laughing at yourself funny. Laughing with the universe funny. Because the universe clearly designed social interaction as a comedy. And we're all just doing our best with the script we've been given. I want to talk about The Others, Season 4, Episode 12, because it contains a lesson that I think Gumball delivers better than any other show I've seen. In this episode, Gumball and Darwin realize that there are other students at Elmore Junior High, other characters, people who've been going to school with them for years, and who they've never noticed, never spoken to, never thought about. And when they find one, a girl named Claire Cooper, they discover that she's going through something genuinely painful. Her parents are divorcing. She's sad. She's struggling. And Gumball, in a moment of breathtaking narcissism, tries to turn her life into his story. He tries to be the hero. He tries to make her tragedy into his adventure. And Claire tells him off. She tells him that her life isn't a narrative arc for him to resolve. Her pain isn't a plot point in his show. She doesn't need a blue cat to swoop in and fix everything. She needs space and time and the right to be miserable without it being part of someone else's character development. I've rarely seen a children's show do something that self-aware, because The Others isn't just about Gumball learning to respect other people's stories. It's about the show itself acknowledging its own structure. Gumball is the main character. The show is built around his perspective. And this episode looks at that structure and says, yeah, but that's kind of messed up, isn't it? Because everyone is the main character of their own life. And treating someone else's pain as a side quest in your narrative isn't heroism, it's ego. The lesson? Not everything is about you. Other people are having experiences right now, difficult and beautiful and complicated, that have nothing to do with you. And the most respectful thing you can do sometimes is acknowledge that and step back. Let them be the protagonist of their own story. You don't need to save everyone. Some people don't want to be saved. They want to be seen. Okay, here's one that I think is genuinely life-changing in a very practical, applicable, use it tomorrow kind of way. The Triangle, Season 3, Episode 39. Darwin discovers that he has an incredible musical talent. He joins the school marching band. He's amazing. Everyone loves him. And Gumball, who loves Darwin more than anyone in the world, gets jealous. And the show doesn't flinch from that. It doesn't soften it. It shows Gumball being jealous of his best friend, his brother, the person he literally evolved a fish to be close to. It shows him trying to sabotage Darwin's success. It shows him being small and petty and mean about something he knows he should be happy about. And I think this is one of the most honest things the show ever does. Because jealousy of someone you love is one of the most common human experiences, and one of the least discussed. We talk about jealousy of strangers. We talk about jealousy of rivals, but the jealousy you feel when someone you genuinely love succeeds at something you can't do, that's a different beast entirely, because it comes with shame. You know you should be happy for them. You know your jealousy is ugly and irrational and says more about you than it does about them. And knowing all of that doesn't make it go away. It just makes it worse. Gumball shows this. Gumball shows the shame. And I think the lesson is, feeling jealous of someone you love doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're a person. The question isn't whether you feel jealousy. You will. You're human. That's the deal. The question is what you do with it. Do you let it turn you into a saboteur? Or do you sit with the discomfort, acknowledge it honestly, and choose love over ego? I think that's one of those lessons that changes your life, not because it's surprising, but because hearing it said out loud by a cartoon at 2 a.m. gives you permission to feel something you thought made you terrible. And permission is powerful. Permission says, you're not uniquely broken. Everyone feels this. Now, what are you going to do about it? While we're on the topic of difficult emotions, let me talk about The Blame, Season 4. This episode tackles media panic. The parents of Elmore become convinced that video games are corrupting their children, and they launch a crusade against digital entertainment. And the show takes this premise and does something unexpected with it. Instead of simply saying, video games are fine, parents are overreacting, which would be the easy, audience-flattering position, it actually examines why parents panic, what they're really afraid of, what the games are actually replacing. And it arrives at something nuanced. Parents blame media because it's easier than blaming themselves. The fear isn't really about video games. It's about the feeling that the world is changing faster than they can keep up, that their children are growing up in a reality they don't understand, and that the tools they have, the parenting strategies, the moral frameworks, the rules, were built for a world that no longer exists. That's terrifying. And when you're terrified, you look for something to blame. Video games are convenient. They're visible. They're destroyable. Your own inadequacy isn't. I think about this episode every time there's a new moral panic about whatever kids are doing. TikTok, AI, whatever's next. The target changes. The pattern doesn't. And Gumball identified that pattern on a children's show aimed at the very audience that adults are panicking about and said, your parents aren't wrong to be scared. They're just wrong about what they're scared of. That's a lesson for everyone, by the way, not just kids, maybe especially not just kids. Every parent could watch The Blame and recognize something in it, and every kid could watch it and feel a little more compassion for the adults in their life who are trying their best to navigate a world they didn't build and don't fully understand. And speaking of parents navigating a world they don't understand, I want to spend a moment on The Internet, Season 2, Episode 37, because it does something really specific with that concept. Gumball uploads an embarrassing video of himself to the internet, and it goes viral, and the episode charts the entire life cycle of online humiliation, the initial horror, the brief hope that it'll go away, the escalation as more people share it, the point where it becomes a meme, the total loss of control over your own image. This aired in 2013. Before most of the major viral humiliation cycles that dominated the next decade of internet culture. Before cancellation was a word we used for people instead of TV shows. And the show saw it coming. It saw the architecture of public shame being built in real time and said, this is going to be a problem. Not in a preachy, be careful online way, in a, this is genuinely terrifying and nobody has any idea how to deal with it way. The lesson isn't don't post things online. The lesson is, once something is out there, it's not yours anymore. Your image, your words, your moment of vulnerability, the internet takes ownership. And the internet doesn't have compassion. It doesn't have context. It doesn't know that the embarrassing video was a mistake made by a kid who didn't know any better. It just shares and reshares and adds commentary and turns your worst moment into everyone else's entertainment. I think about this episode every time I see someone getting dragged online. Every time a moment of human weakness gets turned into content. And the show, this kids show from 2013, understood the mechanics of that transformation before most adults did. It understood that the internet isn't a place, it's a machine. And the thing it manufactures is attention. And attention, unmoored from empathy, is one of the most destructive forces in the world. While I'm on the topic of the show, seeing things before anyone else, let me mention The Copycats, Season 5. This episode is directly about the Chinese knockoff show, Miracle Star, which copied the amazing world of Gumball's format, characters, and jokes without permission. The show responds by making an episode where a family of copycats, Kiki and Quack and their parents, move into Elmore and copy everything the Wattersons do. And here's where it gets clever. Instead of just being angry about plagiarism, the show turns it into a meditation on originality. What makes something original? Is it the idea or the execution? Is it the character design or the personality? If someone copies everything about you, your appearance, your actions, your words, are they you or are they something else entirely? And at what point does imitation stop being flattery and start being theft? The lesson there is nuanced in a way I didn't expect from a show settling a real-world grievance inside its own fiction. Originality isn't about being first, it's about being genuine. The copycats can replicate the Wattersons' actions, but they can't replicate their motivations. They can mimic the surface, but they can't access the depth. And that distinction between what you do and why you do it is the difference between a person and a performance, between a real life and a copied one. I actually think this connects to the show's broader theme about authenticity. Across its entire run, Gumball is obsessed with the question, what's real? What's performed? Where's the line between who you are and who you're pretending to be? The name asks it through identity. The shell asks it through physical appearance. The copycats asks it through artistic originality. The disaster asks it through the nature of fiction itself. And the answer is always the same, phrased differently each time. Real is what you choose when nobody's watching. Real is what you do when there's no audience. Real is the part that remains after every mask has been removed. And I think that's life-changing because it gives you a compass, not a map, a compass. It doesn't tell you where to go. It tells you which direction is true. And true, for this show, always points toward honesty, not brutal honesty, not performative honesty, just the quiet kind. The kind where you sit with yourself in the dark and admit what you actually feel, even if it's ugly, even if it doesn't match the version of yourself you've been presenting, even if it means taking off a shell you've been wearing your entire life. Let me pull on one more thread before I move to the love episode, because there's a lesson in The Fury, Season 4, Episode 42, that I think doesn't get enough attention. This episode reveals that Nicole has a rival, Yuki Yoshida, a martial artist from her past, who wants to settle an old score. And the episode is animated in this gorgeous anime-style fight sequence that's unlike anything else in the show. The fight is spectacular, dramatic, beautifully choreographed, with all the intensity of a Studio Ghibli battle scene. But what makes the episode life-changing is what it says about rage. Nicole is angry. She's been angry her entire life. We know this from the choices and the parents. Her anger is the engine that powers everything she does. Her work ethic, her protectiveness, her terrifying competence. And in The Fury, we see what happens when that anger is given a target. Nicole fights Yuki not because she needs to, not because it's wise, but because the rage needs somewhere to go. Because she's been holding it in for so long that any excuse to release it is irresistible. And the lesson, and this is the part that genuinely changed how I think about anger, is that anger isn't the problem. Where you put it is the problem. Nicole's anger, directed at protecting her family, is heroic. Nicole's anger, directed at a personal vendetta, is destructive. It's the same anger, the same fire, the same feeling burning in the same chest. But the direction matters. The target matters. And learning to choose where your anger goes, rather than letting your anger choose for you, is one of the most important skills any person can develop. I also want to talk about The Scam, Season 4, Episode 41, because it contains one of the show's most underrated lessons about belief and manipulation. Gumball and Darwin decide to create a fake haunted house for Halloween. They invent a ghost named Gargaroth and charge admission, and it works. People believe. They believe so hard and so fast that the scam takes on a life of its own. People start seeing Gargaroth everywhere, start attributing random events to his influence, start building a whole belief system around a ghost that doesn't exist. And then, Carrie makes Gargaroth real. The belief becomes so intense that it manifests the thing people believe in. And suddenly, the fake ghost is a real ghost, and the scam has consequences that can't be undone. The lesson is elegant and disturbing. Belief creates reality. Not metaphorically, in Elmore, literally. But the metaphor works perfectly outside the show too. The things people believe in, truly believe in, with conviction and community and repetition, become real in every way that matters. They shape behavior. They create institutions. They justify actions. And the people who started the belief, the ones who know it was invented, who know there was no ghost, lose control of it. The belief outgrows the believers. The lie becomes the truth. And at that point, it doesn't matter that it was made up. It's real now. It has teeth. For a show aimed at kids, that's a staggeringly sophisticated observation about the nature of collective belief. And it applies to everything from conspiracy theories to national myths to brand loyalty. We live in structures of belief that were, at some point, invented by someone for some purpose. And those structures are real now. They have consequences. They shape lives. And the fact that they were once constructed doesn't make them less powerful. I keep circling back to how much this show trusts its audience, because these aren't simple lessons. These aren't sharing is caring platitudes. These are genuine philosophical insights, dressed up in comedy and animation, and the spectacle of a show that looks like nothing else on television. And the show never condescends. It never stops to explain what it just said. It never assumes you didn't get it. It just says it and moves on, trusting that the right listeners will catch it and carry it with them. That trust, that respect for the audience, is itself a lesson. It's the lesson that people are smarter than you think, that kids are more capable of complex thought than adults give them credit for, that you don't need to dumb things down to make them accessible. You just need to make them entertaining. If the rapper is good enough, the medicine goes down. And Gumball's rapper, its mixed media chaos, its relentless comedy, its visual inventiveness, is so good that the medicine barely registers as medicine at all. Okay, I want to go somewhere unexpected with this next one. I want to talk about The Love, Season 4, Episode 33, because I think it contains the most genuinely life-changing lesson in the entire series, and it's one that most people skip past because the episode is structured as a series of vignettes rather than a single narrative. Bobert, the school's robot, doesn't understand love, so the citizens of Elmore try to explain it to him, and each explanation is different. Each one shows a different face of love: romantic, familial, unrequited, obsessive, platonic, self-sacrificing. The episode is basically an anthology of love stories, each one about 30 seconds long, each one drawn in a slightly different style. And the lesson, the life-changing one, isn't in any individual vignette. It's in the accumulation. It's in the fact that love cannot be defined by a single example, that no one story captures what love is. That the word love contains so many different experiences, so many different flavors of connection and sacrifice and joy and pain, that trying to pin it down to one definition is like trying to catch the ocean in a bucket. Bobert, at the end of the episode, still doesn't understand love. And that's the point. Love isn't something you understand. It's something you feel in 100 different ways, in 100 different contexts, with 100 different people. And the people who try to explain it to you will all get it partially right and completely wrong at the same time. Because their love and your love aren't the same love. They just share a name. I think that's one of the most profound things a children's show has ever said about love. Not love conquers all. Not love is patient. Love is kind. But love is a word we use for 1,000 different things. And the bravest thing you can do is accept that your version of it doesn't need to match anyone else's. I've been going for a while, and I want to make sure we talk about the way this show handles growing up, because I think that's where the deepest lessons live. The Kids, Season 3, Episode 1, is the episode where Gumball and Darwin's voices start changing. Their voice actors, Logan Grove and Kwesi Boki, were growing up, and the show took what could have been a behind-the-scenes problem and turned it into a story. In the episode, Gumball and Darwin try to deny that their voices are breaking. They try to hide it. They're embarrassed by it. And the show treats puberty, essentially, as something that is simultaneously funny and sad. Because it is. Growing up is funny and sad. It's ridiculous and inevitable. And the show's willingness to look at that head on, to make an episode about its own actors' voices changing and frame it as a story about the terror of becoming someone new, is one of the bravest things it ever did. The episode ends with a song. It's a goodbye to the old Gumball and Darwin, to the voices we knew, to the version of these characters that existed in seasons 1 and 2, and the new voices, Jacob Hopkins and Terrell Ransom Jr., take over. And the show keeps going, different but the same. The lesson is one that sounds obvious, but isn't. You will change, and that's not a tragedy. The person you are now is not the person you'll be in a year, or 5 years, or 10. And that can feel like loss, like you're losing yourself, like the old you is dying and the new you is a stranger. But it isn't loss, it's growth. And the people who love you will love the new version too, because they don't love a static image of you. They love the thing that stays the same underneath all the changes. The thing that makes you you, even when everything else shifts. Ben Bacalé has talked about this episode in interviews. He said it was good to say goodbye to Logan and Kwesi, who had really embodied those characters. And I think the way he phrased that is perfect. They embodied the characters, past tense, because the characters outgrew them. And that's life. That's what happens. You outgrow things. You outgrow voices, and bodies and identities, and entire versions of yourself. And the people who were part of those old versions matter. They shaped you, but they can't always follow you where you're going next. I think one of the most underrated lessons in this show comes from its structure rather than any individual episode. Gumball is episodic. Things reset. Status quo gets restored. Characters don't age much. And yet, and this is important, the show remembers. It builds continuity. It references past events. Characters grow in small ways. Penny stays out of her shell. Rob stays a villain. The Void stays threatening. Nicole stays complicated. And the lesson in that structural choice is, you can live a life that looks the same on the surface. Same house, same school, same family, and still be changing underneath. Growth doesn't always look like growth. Sometimes it looks like repetition. Sometimes you think you're stuck because the scenery hasn't changed. But if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll notice that you're not the same person watching the same view. The view is the same. You're different, and that's enough. And you know what? Since we're talking about growth and change, let me bring up something that I think connects to this idea in a really unexpected way. The finale, Season 2, Episode 40, is the episode where every bad thing the Wattersons have ever done catches up to them. Every car they've crashed, every building they've damaged, every person they've hurt. The entire town of Elmore decides enough is enough and comes after them. It's karmic payback on a massive scale. And the episode doesn't let the Wattersons off the hook. It doesn't give them an easy way out. It shows, systematically, every consequence they've been avoiding, every debt they've been running from, every piece of collateral damage they've caused and never addressed. And it's funny, hilarious actually, but it's also a genuine reckoning. And the lesson isn't face the consequences of your actions, although that's part of it. The deeper lesson is, living in a world with other people means accumulating debts. Every interaction, every choice, every careless moment creates a ripple that touches someone else. And you can ignore those ripples for a while. You can keep moving forward and pretend the wake behind you isn't there. But eventually, the water catches up. And when it does, the only thing that saves you is the willingness to stand there and take it. The Wattersons don't escape in the finale. They don't win. They don't talk their way out. They just endure. They stand in the wreckage of their own actions and survive it. And I think that's a lesson about resilience that's more honest than most. Sometimes you can't fix what you've broken. Sometimes you can't make it right. Sometimes all you can do is be present for the consequences and keep going afterward. And that's not failure. That's accountability. And it's the first step toward doing better, which connects back to the parents and Nicole's relationship with her family. Because forgiveness, in Gumball's world, isn't easy. It's not a single decision. It's not a montage. It's messy and incomplete and often unresolved. Nicole doesn't fully forgive her parents in one episode. The resentment has decades of momentum, and the show is honest enough to acknowledge that healing a relationship that's been broken for 20 years takes more than one conversation and one song, even if that song is really, really good. The lesson about forgiveness that Gumball teaches is this: forgiveness isn't something you achieve, it's something you practice. You practice it every day, imperfectly, incompletely, with setbacks and relapses and moments where the old anger comes flooding back. And that's normal. That's the process. The point isn't to arrive at perfect forgiveness. The point is to keep trying, to keep choosing connection over isolation, to keep saying, yes, I'm still angry, and also, yes, I'm still here. I'm still willing. I haven't left. And I think the show's willingness to leave things unresolved, to end episodes without neat bows, to let tensions simmer, to acknowledge that some wounds don't close, is itself a life-changing lesson. Because we live in a culture that demands resolution, that demands closure, that demands a clear ending to every story. And Gumball says, some stories don't end, some conflicts don't resolve. Some relationships live in the space between forgiveness and resentment, and that space, uncomfortable as it is where most of real life actually happens. Learning to exist in that space, learning to hold two contradictory feelings at the same time, to love someone and be angry at them, to forgive someone and still feel the wound, is one of the most important skills anyone can develop. And the fact that a cartoon teaches it better than most therapy textbooks is one of the many reasons I keep coming back to this show. I also want to take a moment and talk about how this show handles masculinity, because I think it does something really interesting that doesn't get discussed enough. Richard Watterson is, by any traditional metric, a failure of a man. He's unemployed. He can't drive. He eats compulsively. He's afraid of virtually everything. He has no career, no ambitions, no skills. His wife earns all the money, fights all the battles, and handles all the responsibilities. Richard sits on the couch, and the show doesn't punish him for this. I mean, it makes jokes about it constantly. Richard's laziness and incompetence are running gags. But underneath the comedy, Richard is happy. Richard is loved. Richard has a wife who chose him over every possible alternative. We know this from The Choices. And children who adore him despite his flaws. Richard is, by every measure that actually matters, successful. And I think the lesson the show sneaks in through Richard is one that quietly challenges a lot of assumptions about what a man is supposed to be. Richard doesn't provide financially. He doesn't fix things. He doesn't protect his family through strength or intelligence. What Richard does is love, fully, openly, without reservation. He loves Nicole so completely that she looks at every possible alternate version of her life and still chooses him. He loves his kids so tenderly that when they insult him, he doesn't get angry. He gets hurt, because hurting him means they've found their way past every defense he never bothered building. And maybe, the lesson is that love is enough. That being present, being tender, being unashamed of your own softness in a world that demands hardness, that's its own kind of strength. It's certainly the kind of strength that holds the Watterson family together. Nicole can fight 1,000 battles, but she comes home to Richard, and that tells you everything you need to know about what she actually values. I'm not saying the show is anti-ambition. I'm not saying it glorifies laziness. Nicole's drive is a vital part of the family, and the show never suggests otherwise. But I am saying that in a landscape of children's shows where dads are either perfect or absent, Richard Watterson occupies a third space that I think is genuinely radical. A dad who is deeply flawed and deeply loved, and whose love is the thing his family couldn't function without. Not his skills, not his money, his love. And while we're talking about overlooked characters and what they teach us, I want to mention Mr. Small, because Mr. Small is the show's designated weirdo. He's the school counselor who mediates crystals and drives a van called Janice, and believes in things that nobody else takes seriously. He's a joke. He's treated like a joke by almost every other character in the show. But here's what I find fascinating. Mr. Small is often right. Not always. Not perfectly. But his instinct that something is off about this world, the instinct that leads him to the void in season 3, the instinct that makes him sensitive to the weirdness of Elmore's reality, is correct. Elmore is strange. The world is hiding things. The fabric of existence is more fragile than anyone wants to admit. And Mr. Small, in his hippie, crystal-gazing, van-driving way, is the closest thing Elmore has to someone who sees the truth. And in The Question, Remember, Mr. Small is chasing Gumball and Darwin the entire episode, trying to give them his answer to the meaning of life. He runs after them. He drives after them. He crashes. He gets hurt. He never catches up. And we never hear his answer. The episode deliberately denies us the insight of the one character who might have the deepest perspective. I think that's a lesson hiding in plain sight. The people who seem the most disconnected from reality are sometimes the most connected to something the rest of us can't see. The mystics and the weirdos and the people everyone dismisses. They're not always wrong. They're just speaking a language most people don't have the patience to learn. And by the time you realize they had something important to say, they've already crashed their van and you've already moved on. There's one more episode I want to get to before I bring this back around. The Pizza, Season 2, Episode 33. I mentioned Larry earlier, but this episode deserves its own moment because the lesson it teaches is one of the most practically applicable things the show ever said. The Wattersons are having a bad day. Everyone is grumpy. Everyone is being terrible to each other and to the people around them. And in the process of being terrible, they push Larry over the edge. He quits. He quits every single job he holds, which is basically every job in Elmore, and the town immediately falls apart. No one can buy food. No one can get gas. The infrastructure of daily life collapses because the one person who was silently holding everything together finally said, "Enough." And then things get apocalyptic. The town devolves into chaos. People start acting like it's the end of the world. Society breaks down, all because one person, one tired, underpaid, overworked person, stopped showing up. The lesson is sharp and uncomfortable. You don't know how much you depend on the people you take for granted until they're gone. The systems that make your life comfortable, the cashiers, the drivers, the cleaners, the cooks, the people who show up every day to jobs that nobody thanks them for, those systems are not automatic. They're held together by human beings who can quit, who can break, who can reach a point where no amount of obligation or habit or financial necessity is enough to keep them going. And Gumball, the character, not the show, caused this. His family's selfishness and entitlement pushed Larry past his limit. And I think the show is very deliberately saying, your comfort is built on other people's labor. And if you don't treat that labor and those people with basic respect, the whole structure can collapse. Not gradually, not with warning, just all at once. Like the ground opening up beneath you. Honestly, every time there's a news story about worker shortages or service industry burnout, I think about the pizza. I think about Larry throwing his hat on the ground. I think about how fast everything fell apart. And I think about how a children's show from 2013 predicted all of it with more clarity than most economic analysts. While I'm thinking about prediction, I want to quickly mention something about the show's relationship with time. Because Gumball exists in this weird temporal space where the characters don't age, but the world around them does. Technology updates. Cultural references shift. The internet evolves. But Gumball and Darwin stay 12. Nicole stays 38. Richard stays Richard. And I think there's a lesson in that too. One that the show might not even be aware it's teaching. Time moves differently for different people. Some people grow up fast. Some people never grow up. Some people change visibly, dramatically, publicly. And some people change on the inside, while the outside stays exactly the same. And neither way is wrong. Neither way is better. They're just different. And the mistake is assuming that because someone looks the same, they are the same. That's the mistake Larry's customers make. That's the mistake Nicole's parents make. That's the mistake everyone makes about Richard. The outside is a terrible indicator of the inside. And the sooner you learn that, the more compassion you'll have for the people around you and for yourself. The question brings us full circle, because that episode, the one I started with, the one where Sosie throws mayonnaise at pigeons, is really the show's definitive statement on what matters. Gumball and Darwin ask everyone what the meaning of life is. They ask Larry, who says the meaning of life is work, and then promptly breaks down and throws his money and his hat and his name tag away, trapped in an endless loop of routine. They ask Alan, who says the meaning of life is to be good to others, and then immediately gets beaten up while begging Gumball and Darwin for help they refuse to give. They ask Nicole, who channels Conan the Barbarian and says the meaning of life is to crush your enemies. They ask Coach, who says it's a quest for self-discovery. They ask a dead skydiver, who says it's about living life to the fullest. He jumped out of a plane and died after 70 seconds of bliss. And then the planets themselves weigh in. The entire solar system sings a song about how cosmically insignificant human life is, how nothing anyone does matters on a galactic scale, how the universe doesn't care about your hopes or your dreams or your questions about meaning. And by the time they finish singing, billions of years have passed, and the sun explodes. It's bleak. It's hilarious. It's both at the same time. And then Sussy, sitting on a bench, covered in mayonnaise, says, "The meaning of life is finding your own way to enjoy it." And that's it. That's the show's answer. It's not be good. It's not work hard. It's not crush your enemies or live dangerously or nothing matters. It's find your way, yours, not someone else's. Not the one society tells you, not the one your parents designed for you, not the one that looks best on paper, the one that works for you, the one that makes the time you have, however brief, however cosmically insignificant, feel like yours. And maybe that way involves throwing mayonnaise at pigeons. And maybe that's fine. But you know what? Before I start wrapping up, there's one more thing I want to say about the question, because I think there's a detail people miss. The whole episode, mister. Small is chasing Gumball and Darwin. He's running after them, driving after them, getting into accidents, being launched through the air, all because he has the answer. He has something to say, and they never hear it. The episode ends without Mr. Small ever catching up. And I keep thinking, what was his answer? What was the school counselor, the hippie, the mystic, the guy everyone ignores, going to say about the meaning of life? And the show deliberately withholds it, on purpose. And I think that withholding is the lesson. Or at least part of it. Some answers aren't for you. Some wisdom arrives at the wrong time, from the wrong person, in the wrong form, and you miss it. You keep walking. You sit on a bench and hear something better from someone you didn't expect. And the answer that was chasing you, the one that came from credentials, from authority, from the person who was supposed to know, never reaches you. And that's okay, because the answer you needed found you anyway. I think that's one of the most subtle things the show ever did. A running gag that's actually a philosophical statement. A joke about a guy falling off a van that's really about how wisdom doesn't follow the paths we expect it to. It doesn't come from counselors and gurus and authority figures. Not always, anyway. Sometimes it comes from the weirdest person you know. Sometimes it comes from a moment of quiet after a sugar crash. Sometimes it comes from a pigeon covered in mayonnaise. And isn't that exactly what this show has been doing to us the entire time? Isn't Gumball itself the sussy in this equation? The unexpected source? The weird one? The thing nobody was taking seriously, that turns out to have the real answer? I mentioned earlier that Bacalé described the show as coming from real places. He said the ideas for stories come from the writers' private lives, their most shameful moments, their most problematic childhood experiences, and they turn those into comedy. And I think that's why the lessons feel so real. They are real. Underneath the absurdity, underneath the animation, underneath the mixed media chaos, there are actual human experiences being processed, actual pain being transformed into something watchable, actual wisdom being extracted from actual mistakes. That process, taking something painful and making it funny, taking something personal and making it universal, taking something complicated and making it accessible without dumbing it down. That's what great art does. And I don't use that word carelessly. I know The Amazing World of Gumball is a kids' show. I know it airs, or aired, on Cartoon Network, between ads for toys and other cartoons. I know it's 11 minutes long and features a character called Banana Joe. But none of that disqualifies it from being art. If anything, the constraints make the achievement more impressive. Because doing what this show does, embedding genuine emotional and philosophical depth inside a format that's designed for short attention spans and interrupted viewing, requires a kind of skill that most prestige television doesn't even attempt. There's a difference between a show that's deep because it's allowed to be deep, a show with an HBO budget and a critical audience, and the freedom to be as dark and slow and literary as it wants, and a show that's deep despite every structural force pushing it toward the shallow end. Gumball is the second kind, and I think that makes its achievements more remarkable, not less. Because the lessons didn't need to be there. Nobody was asking for existential philosophy in a Cartoon Network show. Nobody was demanding that a series about a blue cat explore the nature of fiction, the ethics of forgiveness, the terror of obsolescence, the weight of parental expectation, the mechanics of belief, the politics of safety, the economics of invisible labor, the psychology of jealousy, the fragility of identity, and the meaning of life. all while being one of the funniest shows on television. Nobody asked for that. The show chose it. The writers chose it. Bacalé chose it. And that choice, the choice to be more than necessary, to care more than required, to hide diamonds inside bubblegum, is maybe the most life-changing thing about this show. Because it models something. It shows you what it looks like to take something seriously that nobody else takes seriously. To invest your best thinking in a format that doesn't demand it. To treat your audience, kids, distracted parents, people falling asleep at 3 a.m, as worthy of your absolute best work. And in doing so, it proves that nothing is too small to matter. No audience is too young. No format is too short. No medium is too silly. If you care enough, you can put something real into anything. And the people who are paying attention, even the ones who are barely paying attention, will find it. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about a cartoon. It's about a show that used every tool available to it. Mixed media animation, meta-narrative, slapstick comedy, musical numbers, existential horror, tender family drama, to say things about life that most people never say out loud. And the thing is, it did it without ever being preachy. Gumball never lectures. It never stops to underline its point. It just tells stories. And inside those stories, if you're paying attention, are these little gifts. These little moments of clarity that catch you off guard because you weren't expecting wisdom from a show where the main character once ate a microwave burrito so hot it set his mouth on fire and he had to drink from the toilet. That's the magic of it. That's why I keep coming back to this show, night after night, video after video, because it respects its audience enough to hide the medicine inside the candy. It doesn't think kids are stupid. It doesn't think adults are above cartoons. It exists in this beautiful middle space where anyone can watch it and get something from it, as long as they're willing to look past the surface. And I think that might be the most life-changing lesson of all. The best things in life don't announce themselves. They don't come with a sign that says, "Pay attention, this is important." They're hiding inside the things you weren't taking seriously, inside the background music, inside the expression on a character's face that lasts half a second, inside the joke that makes you laugh and then, 3 hours later, makes you think. Gumball taught me that. A show about a blue cat and a goldfish with legs taught me that the things worth learning are the ones you have to discover for yourself, in the moments when you're not trying to learn anything at all. I want to circle back one more time to something I mentioned earlier, about the animation, because I think the way this show looks is itself a lesson. Gumball's visual style is chaos. It shouldn't work. You've got 2D animated characters standing in photographed real-world locations, interacting with 3 DCGI objects, alongside puppets and stop-motion creatures, and pixel art characters and anime parodies and live-action inserts. Every character is animated in a different style. Every background is a different medium. It looks like someone opened every drawer in the animation studio and dumped everything onto the floor and said, "This is the show now." The show is produced primarily by Cartoon Network Studios Europe, later renamed Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe, in association with Studio Soy in Ludwigsburg, Germany. And the sheer technical achievement of making all these disparate elements coexist in a single frame is something I don't think the show gets enough credit for. In a Bacalé interview from 2025, he described the visual approach as a big sandbox with all sorts of toys. And Matt Lazell, the showrunner of the wonderfully weird world of Gumball, talked about the punk rock spirit that's inherent in Gumball's DNA. This impulse to push boundaries, to try things other shows wouldn't dare. And that punk rock spirit isn't just aesthetic. It infects everything. The storytelling, the themes, the willingness to make an episode about depression or existential dread or the collapse of economic infrastructure and make it look like a cartoon. The form and the content are in constant tension, and that tension is what makes the show vibrate. It's why you can't look away even when you're half asleep. Something about the dissonance between what you're seeing and what you're feeling keeps your brain engaged at a frequency that pure harmony never could. I've noticed something about the guest animation segments too, by the way. The show regularly brings in outside animators to handle specific sequences. Jeremy Perrin animated the safety video in The Safety. Julian Glander did the CGI segments in The Transformation. And there are countless other instances where specific scenes are handed off to artists with completely different styles. And each time, the show absorbs their work without breaking. It swallows their aesthetic whole and keeps going. Because in Elmore, everything fits. Everything belongs. The universe is designed to accommodate difference. And I think that's maybe the most beautiful lesson the show's visual design teaches. There's room for everyone, not in a kumbaya, everyone hold hands kind of way. In a practical, structural, architectural way. The world is big enough, and weird enough, and flexible enough to contain every style, every approach, every kind of person. The 2D and the 3D and the live action and the puppet can all share the same frame. It looks impossible. It works anyway. And the fact that it works, the fact that coherence emerges from chaos, that a shared reality holds together, despite being made of completely incompatible elements, is proof that difference isn't a flaw. It's the raw material of something extraordinary. And it works, not despite the chaos, because of it. Because the visual disunity is what makes Elmore feel alive. It's what makes it feel like a real place. Paradoxically, even though it's the most visually unrealistic show on television. Because real life is messy too. Real life doesn't have a consistent art style. The people around you don't all look like they belong in the same show. Your best friend, and your neighbor, and your teacher, and the person behind the counter at the convenience store all exist in completely different aesthetic universes. And somehow, you share a reality. Ben Bacalé has talked about wanting kids to believe Elmore was a real place they could visit. And I think that impulse, grounding the fantastical in the photographic, making cartoon characters walk through real streets, is itself a lesson. Reality isn't one thing. It's a collision of 1,000 different things. And the beauty of it isn't in the coherence. It's in the fact that it somehow holds together despite the differences. That's Elmore. That's the world. That's the mixed media madhouse we all live in. I want to end with something I've been thinking about for a while. Something specific to this show, and to the experience of watching it the way I think most of us watch it. Late at night, half asleep, looking for something to fill the silence. There's a reason Gumball works as a fall asleep to show. And it's not just because it's calming, it often isn't. There are episodes that are genuinely unhinged in their energy. It's because the show operates on 2 levels simultaneously. There's the surface level, the jokes, the slapstick, the absurdist comedy that washes over you like white noise. And then there's the deeper level, the themes, the character work, the philosophical questions that seeps in when your defenses are down, when you're tired, when you're not trying to analyze anything, when you're just there. And I think that's when the lessons hit hardest. Not when you're actively looking for meaning, but when you've given up looking and meaning finds you anyway. That's what Sussy understood. That's what the show keeps demonstrating, episode after episode. The answers aren't at the end of the quest. They're on the bench where you sat down to rest. The Routine, season 4, is literally about this. Richard goes to the grocery store. That's the whole episode. And inside that mundane, ordinary, nothing special errand, he ends up on an adventure so wild and dangerous and absurd that by the time he gets home, he can't even explain where he's been. But he got the groceries. He did the thing. And the adventure happened inside the doing. And I love this episode because it reframes the mundane as epic. It says, the trip to the store isn't the boring part between the interesting parts. The trip to the store is the interesting part. You just have to see it that way. You have to let yourself notice the strangeness of the ordinary, the adventure hidden inside the routine, the fact that every single day you navigate a world that's more complicated and more beautiful and more terrifying than you give it credit for. Richard doesn't set out to have an adventure. He doesn't choose excitement. He chooses groceries, and the adventure finds him, because that's how life works. You don't get to schedule the meaningful moments. They happen when they happen, on the bus, in the line at the post office, in the pause between saying goodbye to someone and turning away. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss them entirely. You'll get home with the groceries and have nothing to say about the trip. Gumball understands this. Gumball has always understood this. That's why the show can make an 11-minute episode about going to the store feel like an odyssey, because it is one. Every day is one. You just have to be awake for it. I think about that every time I catch myself waiting for life to start, waiting for the big moment, the meaningful conversation, the life-changing event. And Gumball says, it's already happening. It's happening right now, in the boring part, in the routine, in the walk to the store. You just have to pay attention. Or don't. Don't pay attention. Fall asleep. Let the show wash over you. Let the lessons seep in through your half-closed eyes and your relaxed defenses. Because that's how Gumball teaches you. Not by force, not by lecture, by being there, night after night, episode after episode. waiting for the moment when you're ready to hear what it's been saying all along. The show premiered on Cartoon Network on May 3rd, 2011, with a sneak peek of the DVD. It had its world premiere in the UK on May 2nd, 2011, with The Mystery. Ben Bocquelet created it from rejected commercial characters he'd designed during his time at Studio AKA. Characters that were never used because the competition was too strong. He pitched it as a remedial school for cartoons, had it redesigned into a family sitcom when producers felt the original concept was too sad, and spent the next 8 years, across 6 seasons, 240 episodes, a mini-series called Darwin's Yearbook, a clip show series called The Gumball Chronicles, and eventually a revival called The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball that premiered on Hulu on July 28, 2025, proving that a children's show can be as deep, as honest, as philosophically rich as anything aimed at adults. Maybe more so, because adults expect profundity. They look for it. They're braced for it. Kids aren't. And that's why the lessons land harder, because they come disguised as something you weren't taking seriously. And by the time you realize what just happened, it's too late. You've already learned something, but we're not done. Not even close. Because I haven't talked about the biggest lesson the show ever tried to teach, and it's one that spans the entire run of the series. It's about Rob, and it's about the finale, and it's about what happens when the person who sees the truth can't get anyone to listen. The Inquisition, Season 6, Episode 44, aired on June 24th, 2019. It's the last episode of the amazing world of Gumball's original run, and it ends on a cliffhanger that left fans genuinely shaken. Here's what happens. A new superintendent arrives at Elmore Junior High. He calls himself Superintendent Evil. He's live action, a real human being in a world of cartoons, and he starts transforming the students into humans, turning them into real people, stripping away their cartoon nature. And at first, everyone fights back. Gumball and Darwin rally the school. They resist. They defeat the superintendent. They save the day. And then we find out who the superintendent really was. It was Rob. Rob in disguise. Rob trying, desperately, to save everyone. See, Rob knew something nobody else did. He knew the void was coming. He knew that the world of Elmore, the cartoon world, the animated reality, was about to be consumed, canceled, erased. And the only way to save everyone was to transform them into something the void couldn't reach. Real people, human beings, citizens of a different kind of reality entirely. And nobody listened. Nobody understood. Because Rob couldn't explain himself. Partly because he's terrible at communication. Partly because Tina Rex beat him up before he could finish his sentence. And so the heroes stopped the one person who was trying to save them. And then, alone, at night, Rob stood in the school and felt the floor crack beneath him. The void opened up. The static began to swallow everything, and Rob, the forgotten character, the nobody who became a villain because that was the only role left, fell into the abyss. His last words, "Oh no, it's started." I've seen a lot of finales, a lot of shows trying to stick the landing, and The Inquisition isn't a perfect finale. Bocquelet himself has acknowledged that the cliffhanger wasn't the original plan, and that the intended resolution was meant for a movie. But as a statement, as a lesson, it's devastating. Because here's what it teaches, and I think it might be the most important thing the show ever says. Sometimes the person who sees the danger is the one nobody trusts. Sometimes the warning comes from someone so damaged, so marginalized, so historically associated with harm, that the message gets rejected along with the messenger. And by the time the comfortable majority realizes the threat was real, it's too late. Rob saw the end coming. Rob tried to prevent it, and the very people he was trying to save stopped him because they couldn't see past who he was to hear what he was saying. Look, I know this is a cartoon about a blue cat, but that's a lesson that applies to climate scientists, to whistleblowers, to every person who's ever stood in a room and said something is wrong and been told to sit down because they didn't look or sound like the kind of person whose warnings get taken seriously. And the fact that the show, this kid's show, ends on that note, not with triumph, not with a neat resolution, but with the one character who understood reality falling into oblivion, while everyone else carries on in ignorance, that's brave. That's uncomfortably, admirably brave. And I think kids can handle it. I think kids need it. Because the world they're growing up in is full of people who see things others don't. And the lesson that those people are sometimes right, even when they're inconvenient, even when they're scary, even when they come with a track record of antagonism, is one of the most valuable lessons anyone can learn. Ben Bacalé has talked about wanting to give Rob justice in the wonderfully weird world of Gumball. In a 2025 interview at Luca Comics and Games, he explained that he thought Rob being forgotten and made to feel like he didn't matter was one of the worst things the show could have done to someone, and that the resolution needed to address that. The rewrite, the Season 2 finale of the wonderfully weird world of Gumball, eventually gave Rob that justice, revealing that the van shopkeeper had saved him from the void. But even with that resolution, the lesson of the Inquisition stands on its own. The damage of not listening is done whether or not you eventually get around to hearing what was said. I keep coming back to this point, and I know I keep coming back to it, but I think it's the key to understanding everything Gumball is trying to do. The show uses comedy as camouflage. It uses slapstick and visual gags and the sheer absurdity of its animation to create a safe space where difficult ideas can exist without the audience's defenses going up. You can't brace yourself against a lesson you didn't know was coming. And by the time you realize what Gumball just said about identity, about mortality, about the nature of reality, it's already inside you. It's already part of how you think. That's not an accident. That's design. Bacalé has talked about this in interviews. He once said that the stories come from the writers' personal lives, their most shameful, most problematic moments as children, and then they exploit those moments and turn them into comedy. And I think that admission reveals the show's entire philosophy. The truest comedy comes from the truest pain. The funniest episodes are the ones rooted in something real, and the life-changing lessons are hidden inside the jokes, because that's where people are most willing to receive them. Let me talk about something specific that I think illustrates this perfectly: the show's treatment of Larry Needlemeyer, the orange rock who works every job in Elmore, the guy behind the counter at the gas station and the grocery store and the pizza place and the video rental shop. Larry is, in economic terms, the entire service industry of this town compressed into one exhausted, underpaid person. And the show keeps coming back to Larry. In The Pizza, Season 2, Episode 33, the Wattersons have such a catastrophically bad day that they take it out on Larry, and he finally snaps. He quits every job simultaneously. And when Larry stops working, Elmore falls apart. Not metaphorically, literally. The infrastructure collapses. The town descends into chaos. Because without Larry propping everything up with his underpaid, unappreciated labor, nothing functions. And in The Question, when Gumball asks Larry what the meaning of life is, Larry says, work. And then he immediately starts malfunctioning, repeating his daily routine like a broken recording. Get up, shower, work, home, sleep, get up, shower, work, until something snaps, and he throws his hat and his money and walks away from the counter mid-sentence. The lesson here is quiet, but devastating. The systems we depend on are held together by people we don't see, people we don't thank, people whose entire existence has been compressed into a function, a role, a service they provide. And those people are breaking, not dramatically, not heroically, quietly, in the spaces between transactions, in the loop of a routine that has no exit. I think about Larry when I'm in a convenience store, when I'm picking up a coffee, when I'm interacting with someone whose job is to make my life slightly easier and whose name I will forget before I reach the door. Gumball made me think about that. A cartoon about a blue cat made me more aware of the invisible labor that holds the world together. And I don't think that awareness has faded. I think it's stuck. Here's another thread I want to pull on: the way Gumball handles sibling dynamics, specifically the relationship between Gumball and Anais. Anais Watterson is 4 years old and the smartest person in her family. She's a genius. She reads philosophy. She understands complex mathematics. She has more emotional intelligence in one floppy pink ear than the rest of the Wattersons have combined. And she's 4. And the show doesn't just play that for laughs, although it does, constantly. And it's always funny. It also explores what it means to be the smart one in a family of lovable disasters. Anais loves her family. She genuinely loves them. But she also can't fully connect with them because she operates on a level they can't reach. Her brothers are idiots. Her father is an overgrown child. Her mother is competent, but consumed by the labor of keeping everyone alive. And Anais is stuck in the middle, simultaneously the most capable person in the room and the most isolated. The Parasite, Season 4, gets at this directly. Gumball and Darwin discover that Anais's friend, Jody, is actually using her. The friendship is one-sided. Jody is manipulative and controlling, and Anais can't see it because she's so desperate for connection with someone who treats her as an equal that she'll accept any version of friendship, even a toxic one. And the lesson there is sharp. Intelligence doesn't protect you from loneliness. Being smart doesn't mean you can spot manipulation when it's aimed at the one thing you want most. Anais, for all her brilliance, is as vulnerable as anyone to the basic human need for belonging. And predatory people know how to exploit that need. They sense it. They can tell when someone is starving for connection, and they position themselves as the solution. I've seen this pattern play out in real life more times than I'm comfortable with. Brilliant people, capable people, people who should know better, stuck in friendships or relationships or professional arrangements that are clearly one-sided, not because they're stupid, but because they're lonely. Because loneliness has a way of overriding intelligence. And Gumball, a show aimed at children, identified that dynamic and presented it honestly, without judgment, with compassion for Anais and anger at the situation she was in. That matters. That helps. Seeing that pattern named, even in a cartoon, gives you the vocabulary to recognize it in your own life. I want to take a moment and talk about how this show handles masculinity, because I think it does something really interesting that doesn't get discussed enough. Richard Watterson is, by any traditional metric, a failure of a man. He's unemployed. He can't drive. He eats compulsively. He's afraid of virtually everything. He has no career, no ambitions, no skills. His wife earns all the money, fights all the battles, and handles all the responsibilities. Richard sits on the couch, and the show doesn't punish him for this. I mean, it makes jokes about it constantly. Richard's laziness and incompetence are running gags. But underneath the comedy, Richard is happy. Richard is loved. Richard has a wife who chose him over every possible alternative. We know this from The Choices. And children who adore him despite his flaws. Richard is, by every measure that actually matters, successful. And I think the lesson the show sneaks in through Richard is one that quietly challenges a lot of assumptions about what a man is supposed to be. Richard doesn't provide financially. He doesn't fix things. He doesn't protect his family through strength or intelligence. What Richard does is love, fully, openly, without reservation. He loves Nicole so completely that she looks at every possible alternate version of her life and still chooses him. He loves his kids so tenderly that when they insult him, he doesn't get angry. He gets hurt because hurting him means they've found their way past every defense he never bothered building. And maybe the lesson is that love is enough. That being present, being tender, being unashamed of your own softness in a world that demands hardness, that's its own kind of strength. It's certainly the kind of strength that holds the Watterson family together. Nicole can fight 1,000 battles, but she comes home to Richard. And that tells you everything you need to know about what she actually values. I'm not saying this show is anti-ambition. I'm not saying it glorifies laziness. Nicole's ambition is a vital part of the family, and the show never suggests otherwise. But I am saying that in a landscape of children's shows where dads are either perfect or absent, Richard Watterson occupies a third space that I think is genuinely radical. A dad who is deeply flawed and deeply loved, and whose love is the thing his family couldn't function without. Not his skills, not his money, his love. Okay, let me talk about something the show does that I don't think any other children's show has even attempted. Its treatment of the relationship between fiction and reality. I touched on this with The Void and with Rob, but I want to go deeper because I think this is where the show's lessons get genuinely life-changing in a way that transcends the usual morals for kids territory. In The Disaster, Season 4, Episode 40, Rob gets the universal remote and starts manipulating reality. He rewinds time. He changes the language of the show. He adjusts the resolution. He turns off the subtitles. He literally controls the medium they all exist in. And during his monologue to Gumball, he says something that cuts to the bone. None of this is real. Nothing in Elmore is real. They're all characters in a show, performing for an audience they'll never meet. And when that audience gets bored, they'll all cease to exist. And Gumball doesn't have a counter-argument, because Rob is right. Within the logic of the show, he's absolutely right. They are characters. They are fictional. Their world can be paused and rewound and erased. And the only thing keeping them alive is the continued interest of the audience. Now, you could dismiss this as a meta joke. A lot of shows break the fourth wall. A lot of shows wink at the audience. But Gumball doesn't wink. Gumball takes the fourth wall, breaks it, and then sits in the rubble and asks, "So what does that mean for us? If we're fictional, do we still matter? If our world isn't real, does the love in it still count? If someone can press a button and erase us, are we still worth caring about? And the answer the show gives, the answer it gives through Gumball's desperate fight to save his family, through Nicole's fierce protection of her children, through Darwin's willingness to evolve lungs and legs for the sake of belonging, is yes. Yes, they matter. Yes, the love counts. Yes, they're worth caring about. Not because they're real in any objective sense, but because the feelings are real, the connections are real, the experience of being alive, even a fictional life, has value. Because value isn't conferred from outside. It isn't dependent on who's watching. It comes from inside, from the love you feel, the choices you make, the people you hold on to when the void comes to take everything away. I think about that when I catch myself comparing my life to someone else's and finding mine less real, less significant, less worthy, less main character enough. And Gumball, from the bottom of its mixed media heart, says, don't do that. Your life is your life. Your story is your story. It doesn't matter if nobody else is watching. It doesn't matter if, on some cosmic scale, none of this counts. What matters is that you're here and you're loving people and you're trying, and that's enough. That has always been enough. There's another episode I want to mention that I think crystallizes something important about this show's philosophy. The Night, Season 4, Episode 37, is a vignette episode that shows what the residents of Elmore dream about. And it's one of the most visually experimental episodes the show ever produced, with each dream rendered in a different animation style. But the lesson isn't in the visuals. It's in the concept. Everyone has an inner life. Everyone dreams. The people you pass on the street, the classmates you ignore, the background characters in your story, they all go home, and they all close their eyes. And they all have hopes and fears and fantasies that are as vivid and complex as yours. And you'll never know what they are. Because inner lives are private. Because the dreams happen behind closed doors, in the dark, in the spaces between what people show you and who they actually are. I think The Night is one of the show's most compassionate episodes. It doesn't have a plot. It doesn't have a lesson in the traditional sense, but it has a thesis. Everyone is more than what you see. Everyone has depth. Everyone contains worlds. And the failure to recognize that, the failure to imagine that the person next to you might be as complicated as you, is the beginning of every kind of cruelty. One more episode, and then I'll start wrapping things up. I want to talk about The Roots, Season 4, because it's an episode that made me rethink something fundamental about love. The Wattersons become convinced that Darwin is unhappy. They notice he's been looking at pictures of fish, of oceans, of his natural habitat, and they conclude that what Darwin needs is to be returned to the wild, to be free, to live the life he was meant to live, instead of the life they've given him. And so they try. They create increasingly elaborate simulations of the ocean. They build a fish tank. They take him to the beach. They do everything in their power to give Darwin what they think he wants, even though giving it to him would mean losing him. And Darwin, watching all of this, is bewildered. Because he doesn't want to go back to the ocean. He doesn't want to be a normal fish. He wants to be a Watterson. He wants the weird, chaotic, occasionally terrifying life he's been living since he grew legs and walked across town. The ocean isn't home. The Wattersons are home. The lesson is painful and beautiful. Sometimes the people who love you will try to give you what they think you need, and what they think you need is to be someone other than who you are. Not because they're cruel, because they love you, and their love has gotten confused with their assumptions about what's best for you. And the hardest conversation you'll ever have is the one where you say, I know you're trying to help. I know you think this is what I want, but what I want is this life, this family, this messy, imperfect, not at all what nature intended reality. And your job isn't to fix me or free me or return me to some version of myself that never existed. Your job is to love me here, as I am, in the life I've chosen. I think about The Roots every time someone tells me what I should want, every time someone projects their version of happiness onto my life and can't understand why I'm not reaching for it. And the show says, gently but clearly, your life doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. Your choices don't need external validation. And the people who really love you will learn to love the choices you've made, even if those choices look nothing like what they would have chosen for you. Okay, here's one more thread, and then I'll bring this all together. I want to talk about forgiveness. The finale, Season 2, Episode 40, is the episode where every bad thing the Wattersons have ever done catches up to them. Every car they've crashed, every building they've damaged, every person they've hurt, the entire town of Elmore decides enough is enough and comes after them. It's karmic payback on a massive scale, and the episode doesn't let the Wattersons off the hook. It doesn't give them an easy way out. It shows, systematically, every consequence they've been avoiding, every debt they've been running from, every piece of collateral damage they've caused and never addressed. And it's funny, hilarious actually, but it's also a genuine reckoning. And the lesson isn't face the consequences of your actions, although that's part of it. The deeper lesson is, living in a world with other people means accumulating debts. Every interaction, every choice, every careless moment creates a ripple that touches someone else. And you can ignore those ripples for a while. You can keep moving forward and pretend the wake behind you isn't there. But eventually, the water catches up. And when it does, the only thing that saves you is the willingness to stand there and take it. The Wattersons don't escape in the finale. They don't win. They don't talk their way out. They just endure. They stand in the wreckage of their own actions and survive it. And I think that's a lesson about resilience that's more honest than most. Sometimes you can't fix what you've broken. Sometimes you can't make it right. Sometimes all you can do is be present for the consequences and keep going afterward. And that's not failure. That's accountability. And it's the first step toward doing better, which connects back to The Parents, the episode about Nicole and her estranged mother and father. Because forgiveness, in Gumball's world, isn't easy. It's not a single decision. It's not a montage. It's messy and incomplete and often unresolved. Nicole doesn't fully forgive her parents in one episode. The resentment has decades of momentum, and the show is honest enough to acknowledge that healing a relationship that's been broken for 20 years takes more than one conversation and one song, even if that song is really, really good. The lesson about forgiveness that Gumball teaches is this: forgiveness isn't something you achieve. It's something you practice. You practice it every day, imperfectly, incompletely, with setbacks and relapses and moments where the old anger comes flooding back. And that's normal. That's the process. The point isn't to arrive at perfect forgiveness. The point is to keep trying, to keep choosing connection over isolation, to keep saying, yes, I'm still angry, and also, yes, I'm still here. I'm still willing. I haven't left. And I think the show's willingness to leave things unresolved, to end episodes without neat bows, to let tensions simmer, to acknowledge that some wounds don't close, is itself a life-changing lesson. Because we live in a culture that demands resolution, that demands closure, that demands a clear ending to every story. And Gumball says, some stories don't end. Some conflicts don't resolve. Some relationships live in the space between forgiveness and resentment. And that space, uncomfortable as it is where most of real life actually happens. Learning to exist in that space, learning to hold two contradictory feelings at the same time, to love someone and be angry at them, to forgive someone and still feel the wound, is one of the most important skills anyone can develop. And the fact that a cartoon teaches it better than most therapy textbooks is one of the many reasons I keep coming back to this show. I want to mention one more thing before I start winding down. There's a specific visual detail in this show that I think speaks to everything we've been talking about. Gumball's world is made of photographs, real photographs. The streets, the buildings, the sky, they're all images of real places, photographed and placed behind 2D animated characters. And those photographs are of a real town. The backgrounds are based on Vallejo, California, a real city that the show's creators used as a visual reference. And I think there's something in that choice that functions as a lesson all by itself. Reality is always there, behind the fiction. The cartoon characters walk through a real world. The jokes happen in front of real buildings. The metaphors are grounded in photographs of actual streets where actual people live actual lives. And I think that's the show's way of saying everything we're telling you, every lesson, every insight, every life-changing moment buried inside an 11-minute episode is real. Not literally real, but emotionally real, experientially real, the kind of real that matters. Because at the end of the day, and I know I'm not supposed to say at the end of the day, but I'm going to do it anyway, because it's the right phrase for what I want to say. At the end of the day, the question isn't whether The Amazing World of Gumball is a good show or a deep show or a serious show. The question is, does it change how you see things? Does it make you notice things you weren't noticing? Does it give you language for feelings you couldn't name? Does it sit with you after the screen goes dark? For me, the answer is yes, every time. This show has changed how I think about family, about identity, about forgiveness, about courage, about the terrifying beauty of existing in a world that might not care whether you do. And it did all of that while making me laugh, while I was half asleep, while my guard was down and my eyes were closing and I wasn't trying to learn anything at all. That's not just entertainment, that's art. And art, the real kind, the kind that changes you, doesn't care what it looks like. It can look like an oil painting in a museum, or it can look like a 2D blue cat standing in a photograph of a California suburb talking to a 3D cactus about the meaning of existence. The container doesn't matter, the truth inside it does. I started making this video because I thought it'd be fun to go through the lessons in Gumball. I thought I'd list some nice moments, talk about some good episodes, and move on. But somewhere around the 4th hour of rewatching, somewhere around the 3rd time I paused the choices to just sit there with Nicole's wordless montage, I realized something. This show didn't just teach me lessons about life. It taught me how to watch, how to look at something that seems simple and find the complicated truth hiding inside, how to take the surface at face value and still dig underneath, how to laugh at something and take it seriously at the same time. I don't know if that's what Bockley intended. I don't know if the writers, sitting in their studio in London, thought about someone watching their show at 3 in the morning on the other side of the world and having their assumptions about cartoons permanently rearranged. But that's what happened, to me, at least. And I suspect to a lot of you too, because you're still here, you're still listening, which means something about this show, this absurd, chaotic, beautiful show about a blue cat and his goldfish brother, got under your skin the same way it got under mine. And maybe that's the real life-changing lesson, the biggest one, the one the show never says directly, but demonstrates in every single frame. Don't underestimate the things that make you laugh. Don't dismiss the things that seem too silly to matter. Don't assume that because something is colorful and loud and ridiculous, it can't also be true. Because some of the truest things I've ever heard came from a show where the characters are made of different animation styles, and the backgrounds are photographs, and the goldfish has legs, and the meaning of life is explained by a girl throwing mayonnaise at pigeons. And if that isn't life-changing, I don't know what is. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Really, genuinely, thank you. Every time someone watches one of these, it means the world. And I hope, somewhere in these couple of hours, you found a lesson that stuck with you. One you'll think about tomorrow, or next week, or at some random moment when you're standing in a grocery store and you remember Richard Watterson and you smile. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And if you enjoyed this, consider subscribing. We've got a lot more Gumball to talk about, a lot more lessons to dig into, a lot more late nights ahead, and I think we're just getting started.